like to call bad PowerPointing, what not to do when creating PowerPoint presentations. So the first mistake, and it's really a big mistake in creating presentations, is forgetting about your audience and not paying attention to who your audience is. The number one most important thing when you are writing writing a letter, or you're writing a book, or you're writing anything, is to think about who your audience is. So if you're writing a business letter that is a cover letter for your resume, your target audience is the hiring manager who's going to, be hiring you, or maybe the recruiter that the hiring manager is going to be hiring in order to, sort through the resumes so that, your resume gets to the hiring manager. So what you need to remember in that case is to make sure that you convince whoever's reading that letter that you're the right person for the job. So it would be, inappropriate to say things like, yo, dude, I'd be awesome in the job, please hire me. You want to think about who your target audience is. So the biggest mistake, whether it's creating a website, whether it's giving a talk, whether it's writing a paper, is neglecting your audience. So you want to make sure that you don't do that when you're giving a talk also. And what I mean by that in terms of giving a talk, is that you need to remember who is going to be watching your presentation. So a presentation that I might give to an elementary school is going to be different than the version that I might give to middle school students, which is probably going to be different than the one that I'm going to give to high school kids, which is probably going to be different than the one I'm going to give to college kids, which is probably going to be different than the one that I'm going to give to potential bosses or colleagues. So you want to think about who your audience is, and especially when you are telling jokes, because humor is important in giving a talk. Nobody wants to sit in the audience listening to some guy talk on and drag on and blah, 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 and be boring and all that stuff. You want something to be interesting and so on. But you need to be careful about what you use in the humor. So, humor is good, but only if it's effective. So you want to think about that. So that's the biggest mistake. I would argue the second biggest mistake, which is in terms of PowerPoint, the biggest mistake in PowerPoint, is being verbose, which means too many words. So, like I say on this slide, beware of too many words. If you write complete sentences in a PowerPoint presentation, nobody will listen to what you are saying, and instead will spend the entire time trying to read the sentences that are on the screen. Also, if you use too many bullet points, you'll lose the audience because there will be too much information displayed at once. Instead, try to limit your content to no more than 5 words per bullet point, 5 bullet points per slide, and no more than 5 text-heavy slides in a row. This is known as the 5 to 5 to 5 rule. This is an awful, horribly bad, really, really terrible slide. Never, ever, ever write a slide like this. And this is the slide, this type of a slide I see all the time when people are giving presentations. And there's a lot of reasoning behind why this is bad. The number one biggest reason that this is bad is that there are words up on the screen, which means that you can't help yourself but read what's on the screen. And by the way, I will show you right now a really cool trick in PowerPoint, and that is when you are in presentation mode, so when you're doing the presentation part of it, if you press V on the keyboard, the screen goes black. And what the screen going black does is it forces your audience to stop looking at the screen and instead start looking at you. If you're in a place where black is not appropriate because it's really dark, and if you do black, it'll black out and nobody will see anything, well then you can do W, which will create a spotlight. And then you can stand in front of the spotlight and talk in front of the spotlight. The point is that having a whole bunch of words on the screen, and I'm going to make it go black, what it does is it makes your audience read the stuff that's on the screen. And studies have shown, in fact, I helped participate in some of them, that if you are reading stuff that's on the screen and you are listening to what the speaker is saying, you will, by default, apply slightly more import on what's written on the screen and not what the speaker is saying. And part of the reason for this, or at least the theory behind it, is that when you read, you hear your own voice reading the content. And everybody is, for lack of a better word, selfish. And I don't mean this in a bad way or pejorative way or anything. It just means that you care more about yourself than you do about everybody else. This is good. This is why you're still alive, you know, because you understand, you know, to do things that'll be beneficial to you. And occasionally you might have to sacrifice yourself, but generally the reason you sacrifice is also because you know that other people think that that's a good thing, and so that makes your, you know, higher and stuff. So the point is, though, that if you read things on the screen, you hear your own voice reading it. And because people, by default, assign greater value to their own voice than other people's voices, that means that if you read stuff on the screen, you're not hearing what the speaker is actually saying, because your own voice is drowning out what the speaker is saying. So as a speaker, you need to make sure that your audience doesn't do that. And one of the ways to do that is to not use full sentences on the screen. And more importantly, make sure that whatever is on the screen matches, if not word for word, at least reasonably close to what it is that you're actually saying. And that you don't skip ahead and show stuff that you're not ready to show until you're ready to show it. Because again, otherwise people will skip ahead and they'll think about it themselves and they won't actually pay attention to what it is that you are actually, well, saying. All right, so that's mistake number 2. Mistake number 3 is not using pictures or using too many pictures. Every slide should have at least 1, maybe 2, at most 3, occasionally 4 would be okay, ideally 1. And the reason that you want to have a picture or 2 on the slide is that it turns out that different people learn things differently. And so some people learn better by hearing. Well, that's why you're speaking. That's why you're giving the talk. So they'll hear, people who are auditory learners are going to hear what you have to say. Some people are visual learners. And so for the visual learner, you want to have the words on the screen so that they can read it, but you also want to have the picture so that they can associate what it is that you're saying to that picture. Because they will then keep that as a memory way of remembering what it is that you talked about. So the picture itself doesn't really matter that much, although it obviously should have something to do with what it is that you're talking about. The main focus of it is to make it so that the visual learner will remember what it is that you talked about. The other type of learner that people tend to be are kinesthetic learners. They learn by doing. One of the things that I generally like to do is if I have something really important to say, I'll stop standing wherever it was that I was when I started to do it, and I'll walk away. Or I'll walk over and I'll point on the screen. Or I'll walk back to my computer and I'll use my mouse and I'll make it go like this. Well, the reason I'm doing that is primarily for the kinesthetic learner who learns more by seeing things move around. And so having imagery helps the kinesthetic learner as well. So that's what that's all about. All right. So here are two versions of the same slide. On the left-hand side is going to be a horribly bad, really awful version. And on the right, it's going to be good. So here's the bad one. Poorly designed slides contain way too much text and are written in complete sentences. Slides like this are boring, cluttered, and make it much more likely that a presenter will read everything on the slide instead of talking to the participants. Instead, it's better to write simple slides, don't use too much text, and only use keywords when possible, and use photos or other imagery on each slide. So that's bad. And that's bad because it's written out as like a handout. This is what the handout should be. So if you are giving, a handout to your audience, writing it out in full sentences is a great thing to do. But it should not be the PowerPoint version of it. I always say that PowerPoint is somewhere between written language and spoken language. And what I mean by that is that spoken language, we have lots of things that are not actually the words. So we have filler words. We have things like and, well, stuff, things like that. We also have things like gestures. Those are the nonverbal communication stuff that are inherent in spoken English. And PowerPoint is somewhere between spoken English and written English. And so an example of a pretty good slide would be something like this. Write sparingly, 5 to 7 words max. Use sentence fragments, not full sentences. Use keywords. The slide on the right says exactly the same information the slide on the left does. But the slide on the right is a lot easier for the audience to understand what's going on. Now, the speaker probably would say the stuff that's on the left. So the stuff on the left could either be written in what are known as the speaker notes area. It's in PowerPoint, there are a couple of places where the speaker notes can be. One of them is a section called the notes page. Another place is below the actual the main part in the normal view. There's a speaker notes area. The stuff that's on the left side could go into the speaker notes for this slide. But the well-designed slide part is much better than the poorly designed slide. And again, I see way too many slides that look like this. All right, mistake number 4. Be careful about colors. Be really careful about colors. Be extremely careful about colors. So what you want to have is you want to have high color balance. You want to have high contrast between the background color and the color of the content. I would argue the choice that I made here is decent but not great. And the reason I say it's decent but not great is because it's white on black. And white on black can be a little bit harsh. It might have been better if I'd chosen a softer white, like a light gray maybe, or a light yellow. Might have been a better choice than pure white on pure black. That said, it's decent. So again, you want to have high contrast between the text and the background. So here are some examples. So the good ones, this one's pretty good. Black background, white text. This one's pretty good. Light blue background with black text. White background with black text, pretty good. This is bad because the contrast is not strong enough. And in particular, some people are colorblind. In particular, about 10% of men are colorblind. It's around 8 to 10% of all men are colorblind. And so people who are colorblind have a hard time telling the difference between green and red. So using green and red together, if you are not colorblind, it's totally fine. But if you are colorblind, that looks like gray and gray. And gray is bad. This one is just really bad. And the reason that this is really bad is because this red and this red are too close to each other. Similarly, this one is bad because this pinky peach and this yellow are too light. So the yellow bad one, if it were black, it would be great. Or if it were, black on yellow, it would be good. Probably black on yellow might be a little bit too strong, but maybe like a navy blue on the yellow would be good. Or if this yellow were a little bit softer with a black, that would be good. This one is pretty awful because, again, black on dark blue is hard, or dark blue on black is hard to read. This one is awful, 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 really, 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 really awful. Almost never do you want to put a picture as your background. Almost never is a picture the right choice for a background. I see so many websites that violate this rule. You really do not want to have a picture be the background. And the reason for that is because you can't read the content that's there. And again, if the main reason for presenting your material is to present your material, you want your material to be readable and understandable. And again, white on yellow, that's awful. It's a terrible choice. Hurts my eyes, so I'm going to stop looking at that. All right. Another big mistake that people make is either using animations too much or not using them enough. So animations are within a slide having some sort of motion. You may have noticed that when I was like on here, it goes from this to this to this. That's an animation. And the reason that animations in this case is great is because it allows me to talk about this thingy without you reading ahead and seeing what the next thingy is that I'm going to talk about. And we don't see that next thing until I'm ready for you to see that next thing. And when I'm ready for you to see that next thing, well, then I show you the next thing. A transition is from one slide to the next slide. So you may have noticed that it goes from this slide to this slide, and every slide, it kind of fades, goes from one slide to the next slide to the next slide. That is a transition. So an animation is within a slide, and a transition is between slides. And like I said, when used correctly, animations and transitions add interest and enhance the understanding. They add interest because there's motion going on. And especially for your kinesthetic learner, that would be something that said, ooh, that's cool. I'm going to pay attention to that. It also can help in understanding the material, especially if you have a lot of material on your slide. That you, there may be no way for you to limit it to just 5 points. You may have to have 7 points or 10 points. If you do, you must put in animations so that only the 3 to 5 things that you want to talk about when you're talking about it show up, and then the next 3 or 4 things show up, and then the next 3 or 4 things show up. But you never want to have 10 things appear at once. The most you want to have is ideally 5. 7 is okay. Once you go beyond 7, it becomes too many. One of the prime examples of this is Social Security numbers. Everybody remembers their Social Security number. It's easy for them to remember. Everybody remembers their telephone number. It's easy for them to remember. Why? Because in the case of Social Security numbers, we have 3 numbers, we have 2 numbers, and then we have 4 numbers. Most companies cannot remember what their tax ID number is. But the tax ID number has the exact same number of numbers that a Social Security number has. It's 2 numbers and then 7 numbers. So it's 9 numbers altogether. The reason that most companies can't remember what their tax ID number is not because there are 9 numbers, it's because it's 2 and 7. And 7 is too many things for an adult human to remember. We start to not remember things after 5. That's why 5 is the magic number. Ideally 3, because 3 is super easy to remember. 4 is reasonably easy to remember. 5 is about the most that you can remember at once. Unless you're actively forcing yourself to remember it. And then, even then, it's hard for you to remember more than 5 things. But if you group them into groups of 3 or 4 or 2, then you can remember it. So if you do need to remember your tax ID number, I would strongly advise you to not think of it as 2 and 7, but instead think of it as 3 and 3 and 3, or 3 and 4 and 2, or 3 and 2 and 4, which is what our Social Security numbers normally are. Same thing with telephone numbers. Your telephone number is 10 digits long. You have your area code, which is 3. You have your prefix, which is 3. You have your suffix, which is 4. If you actually had to remember all 10 numbers, you would never remember anybody. Well, nobody remembers telephone numbers anyways because we all have them on our phone now. But when we had to remember phone numbers, nobody would be able to remember a 10-digit phone number. But if you broke it up into 3 and 3 and 4, you can remember it. That's why you want to keep your slides to 3 to 5, at most 7. Because 7 is really that point where once you hit 7, nobody remembers it. That's why tax ID numbers people don't remember. All right. So that's when, so again, animations and transitions enhance the understanding and add interest to what you're doing. But if they're not done correctly, they can also be annoying or distracting.
That's really annoying.
Almost every animation, I think, is awful. In fact, every animation, I would argue, is awful, except for fade and appear. Everything else is some shade of terrible. And the reason for that is that it's mostly about showing how cool your PowerPoint slide is, and not about enhancing the information or enhancing the experience for the audience member. It's more about showing how cool you know how to use PowerPoint. In terms of animations and transitions, again, I would recommend being, be wise about it. And what I mean by that is don't have more than a couple of animations per slide. And always use the same transition and animation throughout the presentation. So again, I recommend appear and fade. Appear is the is the modern equivalent of the overhead projector. So for those of you who remember this antique over here, in the olden days, if I wanted to give a talk, I would write it out on like a piece of plastic, and I would then have a regular piece of paper, and I would stick the regular piece of paper over the plastic, and I would move my paper down to show the stuff I wanted to show, and then when I wanted to show the next thing, I would move it down. If you've ever seen a overhead projector being used, that's essentially what a pier does. And fade is basically a pier, but softer. All right. So the other thing I'll point out is that so far all of my transitions have been fade. So it goes from here to here, it's using fade. Except for if you have something surprising to show, then you might want to end your slide or whatever with something different, in which case you do something like that. Yeah, don't ever use applaud. There are a whole bunch of them that I strongly advise you not to use. That's one of them. In fact, basically any of them that are found by default on the machine, don't use. You know, they're pretty bad. The other thing, and I forgot to mention this when we were talking about imaging, but don't forget to credit your pictures. That you should go to places like Wikimedia Commons in order to get your pictures, or to go onto Flickr to get your pictures, and make sure that you use the Creative Commons. Once you know where you got the picture from and you got permission to use it, then put in an image credit for every picture. Now, whether you do it like I did on this slide deck by putting it at, on each individual slide, or whether you create a separate slide at the very end that has a listing of all of your image credits, how you do it doesn't really matter, but I would strongly advise you to do that. Do you have to? Well, technically, yes, but, are you going to get sued over not putting out the, probably not. But as I said before, just because, the policeman does not catch you going 95 miles an hour on the freeway doesn't mean that it's okay for you to go 95 miles an hour on the freeway. Just because whoever made this picture doesn't sue me over using their picture if I didn't credit them, doesn't mean that I shouldn't credit them. Should always credit when it's possible. So with that, I have a video I want to show you. This is one of the best examples of what to do and what not to do, mostly what not to do in PowerPoint. So it's comedian Don McMillan, and he is really great. So I'm going to show you this.
About PowerPoint, and I figure it's kind of my duty to point them out. So here we go. Here's common PowerPoint mistakes. Number one, people tend to put every word they are going to say on their PowerPoint slides. Although this eliminates the need to memorize your talk, ultimately this makes your slides crowded, wordy, and boring. You will lose your audience's attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Please don't do that anymore, please. Number two, most common, many people do not run spell check. Big mistake. Nothing makes you look stupider than spelling errors. It's got a red line under it. Recheck the spelling. And finally, I hate this. Avoid excessive bullet pointing. Only bullet key points. Too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters. hence the bullet point. Bad color schemes, not good. Clashing background and font colors can lead to distraction, confusion, headache, nausea, vomiting, and loss of bladder control. I can't stay on that one too long. Here's something I've noticed. The number of PowerPoint slides you have in your talk, the less useful your talk actually is. Unfortunately, my presentation is right there. I've also noticed this. People love to pack data in their presentations. They just shove more and more data thinking it's better, but it's not. The more data you have, the harder it is to read your slide, and the effectiveness plummets. Now you can improve the effectiveness by adding some shading and some 3D effects and some second order and third order effects. And then, I know, let's add some labels. That'll help a lot. And that's pretty much every marketing slide I've ever seen right there. Then some like VP of marketing standing there going, it's real clear in Q4. What the hell are you talking about? Now, I'm into in animation. People become animators in PowerPoint. You can have things flying all over the place, and that can be good. If you're a visual learner, that will improve the effectiveness of your performance. But if you're easily distracted, more animations, and people have no idea what you're talking about. They're just, wow, that is cool, wow. And there's regions here, by the way. There's the simple but effective region. There's the active but confusing, the effective but boring, the active but ineffective, the dull but static region, the busy but useless, the ADD only region, the useful but amusing, the stupid but confusing, the double triangle, the hyper triangle, the sleepy square, the dizzying pentagon, and everything else I just call pointless motion. That slide right there took me an hour and a half to make, right there. PowerPoint can just suck the life out of you. It's amazing. I've also come up with this. It's a kind of a little science I've invented called font analysis. Basically, the font you choose says something about who you are as a person. There's a huge list of fonts, and you choose one, and that says something about you. So be careful the font you choose. For example, if you choose Courier New, which happens to be my favorite, you're probably organized in structure. If you choose Matisse, it means you're artistic. And if you choose Times New Roman, it means you're lazy, apathetic, and unimaginative, and you always use the default. A lot of Times New Roman people, welcome. We got some more. If you use freehand script, you're a horrible speller, so you try to hide it with a hard-to-read font. Very smart. If you use Gothic, it means you're very pale and you wear black. And if you choose Wingding, it means you're a nerd and you have no life. In fact, if you know what those symbols mean, you'll never have a date. Trust me. Don't bother.
Animations and stuff. So the way that you create an animation is that I need to have something. So here is something. So if I, and this is maybe something else. And so if I go into animations and I select something to animate, I can choose in the animation. These are all of the animations that exist in PowerPoint. There's actually more under more effects, but these are the default ones. And of these, the only ones that I recommend using are appear and fade. Those are the only two that I really recommend using. And here is kind of why. So I will use one of the more annoying of them. So I'll use like wheel. So what wheel does is this. I don't know if you saw it, but it wheeled away. If I go in on, if I use like custom path allows me to draw a custom path. So that what that will now do is that will do that, which is really cool, but you know, again, just makes your audience member think, oh, that's cool. I wonder how he did that, and not actually pay attention to what it is that he's actually talking about. That said, using things like that can be important, because if you were if I had, say, a definition of something, so I have a word like, I don't know, Python is one of the computer languages. So I'll say, computer language. And I have like a list of other stuff. So, football team and, I don't know, pizza and type of ice cream. So if I wanted to say, what is Python? Python's a computer language. One of the ways that I could do that is I could use the custom path, and I could say, for example, let me actually make this be smaller in size so it'll be easier to move him, and make him actually be like that. There he goes. So if I do the custom animation on this with a custom path, I could then tell it to go from here to say here. And then what that would do is that if I then present this, when it goes to it, it moves it over to the spot where it is. And so it's conceivable that that could be an effective way of giving information. The problem is that people use it without using it to enhance the information, and instead use it because they think it's cool. And that it brings me to almost every transition. Almost every transition is terrible. So fracture is awful. What is fracture? Well, if I go into fracture and I display fracture, that's fracture. Prestige is pretty bad. Curtains is cool but bad. It's bad because it's neat and all you're doing is saying, oh, that's cool, but not actually paying attention to whatever the talk is all about. And that's why the ones that I like to use are fade and appear. So in terms of presentations, transitions, I usually use fade. I occasionally will use cube. Cube, I think, is kind of okay. This is what cube looks like. So if I go into cube, that's what cube is. So cube can be kind of okay. But honeycomb is just bad. Another bad one is, where's my favorite? Oh yeah, here it is. Origami and airplane are my favorite silly ones. So this is airplane. And here's origami. Again, why? Why would you do that in giving a talk? Unless you were talking about birds or something, then maybe it might make sense, like for the first couple of times, and then after that it would be, even then I would say it's more annoying than it's useful. So I would strongly advise you to use like fade. Maybe, where is it? Maybe box is kind of okay. Cube is kind of okay. Rotate is kind of okay. Conveyor can be okay depending on what it is. This is what conveyor looks like. Conveyor brings it in and then pulls it up. That one's kind of okay. Rotate again is kind of okay. It rotates it in and then brings it forward. But in general, if the animation does more stuff than just displaying the slide, then it means that it's going to be distracting to your audience. And the whole point, again, of giving a talk is to make it so that the talk is understandable.